I met one gentleman on a coastal ferry from Portland to Seattle. He had worked in the licensing department for an advertising agency, specifically in charge of procuring the rights to classic rock songs for television commercials. Now he was a chimney sweep. Given that most homes in Seattle had lost their central heat, and the winters were now longer and colder, he was seldom idle. "I help keep my neighbors warm," he said proudly. I know it sounds a little too Norman Rockwell, but I hear stories like that all the time. You see those shoes? I made them. That sweater, that's my sheep's wool. Like the corn, my garden. That was the upshot of a more localized system. It gave people the opportunity to see the fruits of their labor. It gave them a sense of individual pride to know that they were making a clear, concrete contribution to victory. It gave me a wonderful feeling that I was part of that. I needed that feeling. It kept me sane for the other part of my job. So much for talent. Tools are the weapons of war, and the industrial and logistical means by which those weapons are constructed.
He swivels in his chair, motioning to a picture above his desk. I lean closer and see that it's not a picture, but a framed label.
Ingredients: molasses from the United States, anise from Spain, licorice from France, vanilla, bourbon from Madagascar, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cloves from Indonesia, wintergreen from China, pimento berry oil from Jamaica, balsam oil from Peru. And that's just for a bottle of peacetime root beer. We're not even talking about something like a desktop PC or a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Ask anyone how the Allies won the Second World War. Those with very little knowledge might answer it was our numbers or generalship. Those without any knowledge might point to techno-marvels like radar or the atom bomb.
Sinclair scowls.
Anyone with the most rudimentary understanding of that conflict will give you three real reasons. First, the ability to manufacture more materiel, more bullets, beans, and bandages than the enemy. Second, the natural resources available to manufacture that materiel. And third, the logistical means not only to transport those resources to the factories, but also to transport them out to the front lines. The Allies had the resources, industry, and logistics of an entire planet. The Axis, on the other hand, had to depend on what scant assets they could scrape up within their borders. This time, we were the Axis. The living dead controlled most of the world's landmass, while American war production depended on what could be harvested within the limits of the western states specifically. Forget raw materials from safe zones overseas. Our merchant fleet was crammed to the decks with refugees, while fuel shortages had dry-docked most of our Navy. We had some advantages. California's agricultural base could at least erase the problem of starvation if it could be restructured. The citrus growers didn't go quietly. Neither did the ranchers. The beef barons who controlled so much prime potential farmland were the worst. You ever hear of Don Hill? You ever see the movie Roy Elliott did on him? It was when the infestation hit the San Joaquin Valley. The dead swarming over his fences, attacking his cattle, tearing them apart like African driver ants. And there he was in the middle of it all, shooting and hollering like Gregory Peck in Duel in the Sun. I dealt with him openly and honestly. As with everyone else, I gave him the choice. I reminded him that winter was coming and there were still a lot of very hungry people out there. I warned him that when the hordes of starving refugees showed up to finish what the living dead started, he'd have no government protection whatsoever. Hill was a brave, stubborn bastard, but he wasn't an idiot. He agreed to surrender his land and herd only on the condition that his and everyone else's breeding stock remained untouched. We shook on that. Tender, juicy steaks. Can you think of a better icon of our pre-war artificial standard of living? And yet it was that standard that ended up being our second-grade advantage. The only way to supplement our resource base was recycling. This was nothing new. The Israelis had started when they sealed their borders, and since then each nation had adopted it to one degree or another. None of their stockpiles, however, could even compare to what we had at our disposal. Think about what life was like in the pre-war America. Even those considered middle class enjoyed or took for granted a level of material comfort unheard of by any other nation at any other time in human history. The clothing, the kitchenware, the electronics, the automobiles, just in the Los Angeles basin alone, outnumbered the pre-war population by 3 to 1. The cars poured in by the millions, every house, every neighborhood. We had an entire industry of over 100,000 employees working 3 shifts, 7 days a week, collecting, cataloging, disassembling, storing and shipping parts and pieces to factories all over the coast. There was a little trouble, like with the cattle ranchers, people not wanting to turn over their Hummers or vintage Italian midlife crisis mobiles. It's funny, no gas to run them, but they still hung on anyway. Didn't bother me too much. They were a pleasure to deal with compared to the military establishment. Of all my adversaries, easily the most tenacious were the ones in uniform. I never had any direct control over any of their R&D. They were free to greenlight whatever they wanted. But given that almost all their programs were farmed out to civilian contractors and that those contractors depended on resources controlled by distress, I had de facto control. "You cannot mothball our stealth bombers," they would yell. "Who the blank do you think you are to cancel our production of tanks?" At first I tried to reason with them. The M1 Abrams has a jet engine. Where are you going to find that kind of fuel? Why do you need stealth aircraft against an enemy that doesn't have radar? I tried to make them see that given what we had to work with, as opposed to what we were facing, we simply had to get the largest return on our investment, or in their language, the most bang for our buck. They were insufferable, with their all-hours phone calls or just showing up in my office unannounced. I guess I can't really blame them, not after how we all treated them after the last brushfire war. And certainly not after almost having their asses handed to them at Yonkers. They were teetering on the edge of total collapse. And a lot of them just needed somewhere to vent.
He grins confidently.
I started my career trading on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, so I can yell as hard and long as any professional drill sergeant. After each meeting, I'd expect a call, the one I'd been dreading and hoping for. "Mr. Sinclair, this is the President. I just want to thank you for the job you've done for us, and will no longer be requiring you." It never came. My guess is no one else wanted the job.
His smile fades.
I could have gone head-to-head against the military for the duration of the war, but I'm grateful in the end that I didn't have to. When Travis D'Ambrosia became chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he not only invented the resource-to-kill ratio, but developed a comprehensive strategy to employ it. I always listened to him when he told me a certain weapon system was vital. I trusted his opinion in matters like the new infantry BDU or the Stanford infantry rifle. What was so amazing was to see how the culture of RKR began to take hold among the rank and file. You'd hear soldiers talking on the street, in bars, or on the train. Why have X when for the same price you could have 10 Ys, which could kill 100 times as many Zs? Soldiers even began coming up with ideas on their own, inventing more cost-effective tools than we could have envisioned. I think they enjoyed it, improvising, adapting, outthinking the bureaucrats. The Marines surprised me the most. I'd always bought into the myth of the stupid jarhead, the knuckle-dragging, lockjawed, testosterone-driven Neanderthal. I never knew that because the Corps always has to procure its assets through the Navy, and because admirals are never going to get too fired up about land warfare, that improvisation has had to be one of their most treasured virtues.
Sinclair points above my head to the opposite wall. On it hangs a heavy steel rod ending in what looks like a fusion of shovel and double-bladed battle axe. Its official designation is the Standard Infantry Entrenchment Tool, although to most, it is known as either the lobotomizer or simply the Lobo.
The Leathernecks came up with that one, using nothing but the steel of recycled cars. We made $23 million during the war.
He smiles with pride.
And they're still making them today.